Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're doing a deep dive on performance management. We're going to be looking at a chapter called An Expanded View of Performance Management, and it's by Herman Aguin. So, Aguinum, like the beer.
Okay, I like that.
So, you hear all the time that these systems are really common, these performance management systems. But I was kind of surprised to see that 91% of organizations use them. And the companies that have formal performance management systems, they're 51% more likely to have better financial outcomes. That's pretty significant.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting, though, because despite the fact that they're so common, there's a big gap between what researchers are studying when it comes to performance management and what practitioners are actually doing.
Well, that's interesting. What kind of gap? What are they looking at? What are they doing differently?
So, like in academic journals, the top research topics are things like job satisfaction, work groups, and then, of course, performance appraisal is like how to actually appraise people. But then in the real world, practitioners, they're like, okay, but how do I do talent management? How do I do leadership development?
Right.
So it's kind of ironic because IO psychology is supposed to bridge the gap between the research and practice.
Yeah. You would think so.
Right. It should be a very applied field.
You'd think we'd have it figured out by now.
Right.
So Aguinus actually gives a great example of like a poorly implemented system.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny. He talks about Sally, and she's rushing to get all of her performance reviews done.
Yeah, just checking the box.
Just checking the box. It's like, we've all been there. It's the end of the year. And it's like, oh my gosh, I got to get all these performance reviews done. I don't even know what to write.
Right. And I think that example really highlights the fact that performance management is more than just a checkbox.
Okay.
Aguinus actually defines it as a continuous process, and it's something that should be constantly evolving.
Okay.
And it should be aligned with the organization's strategic goals. And also, I think it's really important to point out that when those systems go wrong, the consequences are pretty serious.
Right. It's not just that they're not effective, it's that they can be harmful.
Yeah.
I mean, you could have lawsuits, you could have employee burnout, you could just have like tons of wasted resources.
Absolutely. And so that's why I think, understanding the core purposes of a good performance management system is really important.
Okay, so what is a good system?
So Aguinus outlines 6 key purposes of a good performance management system.
Okay.
So the first one is strategic. It's making sure that everybody in the organization is working towards the same goals.
Oh, okay. So strategic alignment.
Right.
Like we're all on the same page.
We're all on the same page. And then there's informational. So using data from the performance management system to actually make decisions.
Okay. So it's not just like, again, we're checking a box.
Yeah. It's about actually using the information.
And making informed decisions.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got strategic, we've got informational.
Then there's administrative, which everyone kind of thinks about, which is like using it for compensation, promotions, all that kind of stuff.
The HR stuff.
The HR stuff. And then developmental, which is about actually helping people grow and improve.
Okay. And then what about, like, I feel like there's got to be some component that deals with, making sure we have the right people.
Yes, that's organizational maintenance, which is like making sure you have the right people in the right roles at the right time.
Okay, and then I guess the last one would be, making sure everything's documented.
Yes, and that is documentation.
Okay.
So that's important for legal reasons.
Of course.
But also for evaluating how effective the system actually is. So we have these 6 purposes of performance management systems. And Aguinus actually gives an example of a company that's doing this well, Celico Credit Union.
Oh.
And what they did was they revamped their whole performance management system, and they addressed all 6 of these purposes.
Wow.
And it led to a lot of positive changes within the organization.
So I guess hearing all of this makes you kind of think about like, well, how does my workplace stack up?
That's a great question. How does your workplace stack up? And I think to answer that question, we need to actually dive into the performance management process itself.
Okay. So how do we think about that?
So Aguinus kind of breaks down the process into 6 stages.
6 stages. Right?
6 stages, yeah. And he uses this, I guess you could call it a roadmap. It's figure 1.1 in the chapter. But we can kind of use that to guide us through the 6 stages. So the first stage is all about prerequisites.
Prerequisites.
Like before you even start doing performance management, what do you need to have in place?
Right. Like if you were building a house, You'd need blueprints, right?
Right.
You can't just start hammering nails.
Exactly. So you need to have a really clear understanding of what the organization's mission and goals are. And you also need to have a really good job analysis for each role.
Okay.
And actually, he gives an example of Key Bank of Utah. And they do a really good job of cascading goals from the very top of the organization all the way down to individual employees.
Oh, wow. So it's like this waterfall effect.
Yeah, and so it makes it really clear for employees what they need to be doing and how it ties back to the overall organizational goal.
Right. Okay, so that's the first stage. We've got to lay the foundation.
Yeah.
What about the second stage?
So the second stage is where we get into performance planning.
Okay.
This is where we're actually setting expectations and defining what success looks like.
Okay.
And so we have three key elements here: results, behaviors, and the development plan.
So results like what you achieve, behaviors is how you do it, and then the development plan is like, where do we go from here?
Exactly.
Okay, so could you give me an example? Like, what would that look like in real life?
Sure. So let's say we have a university professor.
Okay.
Some of their results might be things like publications
Okay.
or student evaluations.
Right. How the students do in the class, right?
Right. Exactly. But then when we talk about behaviors, it might be things like communication skills
Okay.
or their ability to manage a classroom or create a positive learning environment.
Right.
And then the development plan is going to be focused on, okay, what are some areas where this professor can improve and grow?
Okay, so the development plan is based on those two other things, the results and the behaviors.
Exactly. So we're getting information from both of those, and then we're creating this plan to help this professor reach their full potential.
Okay, that makes sense. So in the planning stage, we're also dealing with, providing feedback,
Yeah.
right? Like feedback is a huge part of it.
Absolutely. And it's not just feedback from the boss.
Right.
It can be 360-degree feedback where you're getting feedback from peers and maybe even students or clients.
Right, so you get a really holistic picture.
Exactly. And then all that information is used to create these developmental plans that are tailored to the individual. And I think just to be mindful of time, I'm going to just touch on the remaining 4 stages really quickly. So we have execution, assessment, review, and renewal.
Okay.
And then I think after that, we should probably spend some time talking about team performance because that's become increasingly important.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, with the rise of remote work and everything, it's like, it's not just about individual performance anymore.
Right. It's about how those individuals contribute to a team.
Exactly. So it just adds this whole other layer of complexity.
It does. And it means that organizations need to be able to answer some really key questions, like how do you assess an individual's contribution to a team?
Right.
How do you balance individual accountability with team goals?
Okay.
And how do you actually measure and reward both individual and team performance effectively?
That sounds like a real challenge.
It is, yeah. So it's not just about looking at individual tasks anymore. You also have to think about individual contextual performance, which is how does this person contribute to the overall functioning of the team? And then, of course, you have the overall team performance.
Right.
So you're really looking at 3 levels.
3 levels. That's a lot to juggle.
It is. It's a lot to juggle.
So how do companies actually measure all that? It seems like a lot.
It is. But Aquinas suggests some best practices to make team performance management, more effective. One is, first of all, you got to make sure you have true teams in place. Like, are these actually teams or are they just groups of people working together?
Okay.
And then you got to invest in actually measuring team performance. It can't just be all about the individual.
Right.
And then defining clear goals and measurement approaches for teams.
Okay. So you're not just kind of winging it, like you have an actual plan.
Right. And then using multiple methods and data sources. So not just relying on one survey or one observation, but getting information from different places.
Oh, okay. So like a 360 kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then focusing on both the process and the results. So
Right.
not just did you achieve the outcome, but also how did you get there? And then adopting a long-term view of performance because, teams take time to develop.
They do, yeah. It's not like overnight they're going to be like, the A team.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's for teams. But let's kind of zoom out a little bit
Yeah.
and talk about performance management in general. What are some of the best practices? Because, it seems like it's probably impossible to get everything perfect, right?
It's about progress, not perfection.
Okay.
So Aquinas outlines 11 characteristics of successful performance management systems. Think of it like a checklist.
Okay. Let's hear it. What's on the checklist?
All right. So the first one, strategic congruence. It's got to be aligned with the organization's goals. No silos, everyone working together towards those same objectives.
Okay, makes sense. What's next?
Thoroughness. The system should cover all employees and all major job responsibilities.
Right, not just some people.
Right, and it should be evaluated over the entire review period, not just, the last couple weeks.
Right, no last-minute scrambling. Okay, what else?
Practicality. So the system needs to be user-friendly. It can't be a bureaucratic nightmare. It should be easy to use, clear guidelines, readily available support.
Keep it simple.
Keep it simple.
I like it.
Okay, meaningfulness. Performance evaluations should be relevant, fair, and timely, and they should have a real impact on decisions like compensation and promotions.
Yeah, so it's not just like, again, we're checking boxes.
Right.
It's like it actually means something.
It means something.
Okay, what else do we have?
Specificity. So providing really clear and concrete guidance on what's expected and how to meet those expectations.
Okay, straight to the point.
Straight to the point. No ambiguity.
Okay.
Then being able to differentiate. So being able to distinguish between effective and ineffective performance.
So no, everybody gets a trophy approach.
Exactly.
Okay.
Then reliability. The measures of performance, they need to be consistent. They need to be free from errors.
So like if two different managers were evaluating the same employee, they should come to a similar conclusion.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. And validity.
Validity, too. So making sure that the measures are capturing the truly important aspects of performance. Remember the Venetian gondoliers?
Oh yeah, their performance management system was so funny because like it included things like rowing ability and passenger safety.
Which makes sense.
Which you think, yeah, those make sense for a gondolier.
Right, right. But they also had to confess their sins twice a year.
It's just like what?
Which is not really a relevant measure of their performance as a gondolier.
No, it's a contaminated system.
It's a contaminated system.
Okay, what else do we need for like a top-notch performance management system?
Acceptability and fairness. So employees need to perceive the system as fair, both in terms of how the performance is evaluated, but also how those evaluations are linked to rewards.
So it's like justice, right? Like you want to get the reward you deserve, but you also want to know that the process is fair.
Exactly.
Okay.
Then inclusiveness. So getting input from multiple sources, not just the boss. Incorporating that into the evaluation process.
So getting a well-rounded picture and making employees feel heard.
Exactly. And then openness. So a good system is going to be transparent. No secrets, frequent feedback, clear communication.
No surprises when it comes to performance reviews.
Exactly.
Okay, and correctability.
Oh, yeah.
What is that?
So there should be a way for employees to appeal evaluations if they think there has been an error.
Okay, so checks and balances.
Checks and balances.
So that everything's fair.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got our 11 best practices. But how do we actually know if a system is working?
Right. That's where evaluation comes in.
Okay.
We can't just assume everything's going well. We need data to see if the system is delivering the intended outcomes.
Right. It's like an experiment. You have your hypothesis.
Yeah.
Like, I hypothesize that if we create this great system, people will be more satisfied, we'll have better performance, we'll make more money, and then you got to collect the data
Right.
to see if it's actually true.
Exactly. And so Agwin suggests using things like, confidential surveys, looking at performance trends over time, and also conducting stakeholder interviews.
Okay, so those are ways to gather data.
Yeah.
But how does this all connect back to, the listener and their experience?
That's a great point. I think it's time we shift gears and start talking about how you, as a listener, can actually apply these principles. So think about your current workplace. Think about the performance management system that's in place.
Right. Does your system hit those markers?
Does it hit those marks? Does it encourage, continuous feedback and development? Does it align with the overall goals?
Okay. And if not, like, what could we do?
Yeah, if not, what's one small change that you could advocate for that could make the biggest positive impact?
Like maybe you want to push for more frequent feedback conversations or maybe a clearer link between performance and rewards.
Right, exactly. Or maybe even just a shift in the overall mindset from like checking boxes to continuous improvement.
Yeah, I like that.
These are the kinds of questions that can actually spark real change, not just for you, but for the entire organization.
Yeah.
And remember, performance management, it's all about creating a work environment where everyone can thrive and contribute their best.
Right. It's not about punishing people.
No, it's not. It's about helping people grow.
Okay.
So as you navigate your career path, Don't be afraid to ask questions, advocate for improvements, and embrace opportunities for growth.
Okay.
Performance management is a continuous process,
Right.
and we can all play a part in shaping it for the better.
I like that. That's great advice. So we've talked a lot about performance management systems. What's the big takeaway here?
Performance management, when it's done well, it's powerful. It's more than just, HR paperwork. It can really drive individual growth and team success and ultimately make the organization more effective. But it's often misunderstood.
Right.
Or even, people are afraid of it.
Yeah, it's like that Sally example where she's rushing through performance reviews just to get them done.
Yeah.
Nobody wins in that situation.
Yeah.
It just becomes this dreaded chore. But, you think about Selco Credit Union, they completely transformed their approach.
Right.
They aligned it with those 6 key purposes we talked about.
Yeah.
And it resulted in happier employees and better performance and just a stronger organization overall. So, how do we get there?
Right. And that's where, those 11 characteristics of successful performance management systems come in. They're like concrete principles that can make a real difference.
Right. So think about your own workplace.
Yeah, think about it. Does your system hit those marks? Does it encourage continuous feedback and development? Does it align with the overall goals of the organization?
And if not, what could you change?
Yeah, what's one small change that you could advocate for that could make the biggest positive impact?
Yeah.
I like it.
Think about it.
So performance management, when it's done right, it can be a really powerful tool.
That's for individual and organizational growth. It's about creating this environment where everyone can, really thrive and contribute their best. So that's our deep dive on performance management. Hopefully you found it helpful.
Absolutely. And I hope it inspires you to think critically about the performance management systems in your own workplaces and maybe even advocate for some positive changes.
That's it for this week. We'll see you next time.